Imagine an English sailor, starving, scurvy-ridden, and chained, standing before the most powerful warlord in the history of Japan. He expected the executioner's blade. Instead, he was given the two swords of a samurai. This is the unbelievable true story of William Adams, the man who crossed the world to become the first Westerner to ever join the ranks of the Japanese nobility. To understand the man, we have to look at where he came from. William Adams was born in 1564 in Gillingham, Kent. This was the Elizabethan era, a time when England was transforming from a backwater island into a global naval power. At the age of 12, Adams was apprenticed to Master Nicholas Diggins at Limehouse for the shipyard of the Royal Navy. For the next 12 years, he didn't just learn how to sail, he learned how to build ships from the keel up. He studied astronomy, mathematics, and navigation. By the time he reached his mid-20s, he was a master of the sea. He served under Sir Francis Drake and even commanded a supply ship during the battle against the Spanish Armada in 1588.
But for a man like Adams, the narrow English Channel was too small. He was drawn to the mystery of the East, a place of spices, gold, and legends that most Europeans only whispered about. In 1598, Adams took a gamble that would change history. He joined a Dutch merchant fleet as a pilot major.
The mission was simple, but incredibly dangerous. Sail 5 ships from the Netherlands, navigate the treacherous Strait of Magellan at the tip of South America, cross the Pacific, and reach the East Indies to trade for spices. It was a journey of over 12,000 miles through uncharted, hostile waters. The expedition was a disaster from the start. Of the 5 ships that set sail, the Hope, the Charity, the Love, the Faith, and the Fidelity, only one would ever reach Japan. For 19 months, the crews battled devastating storms, freezing temperatures, and starvation. They were hunted by Spanish patrols and plagued by scurvy. By the time Adams' ship, the Leaf Day, or Love, sighted the coast of Kyushu in April 1600, the situation was horrific. Out of a crew of about 100 men, only 24 were still alive. Only 9 of them could even stand. When they drifted into the Bay of Bungo, the locals had never seen anything like them. The Japanese had encountered Europeans before. The Portuguese and Spanish had been there for decades, but these newcomers were different. They were Protestant, they were bedraggled, and they arrived on a ship bristling with cannons. The Portuguese Jesuits, already in Japan, saw Adams and his crew as a threat to their religious and commercial monopoly. They immediately told the Japanese authorities that Adams and his men were pirates and should be crucified. This is where destiny intervened. The man who held the power of life and death over these sailors was Tokugawa Ieyasu, a brilliant and calculating daimyo who was on the verge of becoming the Shogun, the absolute military ruler of Japan. Ieyasu was curious. He didn't listen to the Jesuits. Instead, he ordered Adams to be brought to his castle in Osaka for questioning. The meetings between the English sailor and the future shogun are the stuff of legend. Adams, through an interpreter, spoke to Ieyasu for hours. He spoke of the wars in Europe, of the different branches of Christianity, and of the maps of the world. He showed Ieyasu that the world was much larger than the Portuguese had led the Japanese to believe. Ieyasu was impressed by Adams' intelligence, his honesty, and his knowledge of shipbuilding and ballistics. While the other crew members were eventually released or kept in a form of comfortable house arrest, Ieyasu kept Adams close. He saw in this Englishman a window to the world that no one else could provide. But this favor came at a price. Adams was forbidden from leaving Japan. Despite his pleas to return to his wife and children in England, Ieyasu refused. He needed Adams. He commissioned Adams to build Japan's first Western-style sailing ships. Working with Japanese carpenters, Adams constructed an 80-ton vessel and then a 120-ton ship capable of ocean voyages. These ships allowed the Japanese to trade as far as Mexico. In recognition of his service, Ieyasu did something unprecedented. he decreed that William Adams the pilot was dead and that Miuda Anjin, the pilot of Miuda, was born. He granted Adams the status of Hatamoto, a high-ranking samurai who served the shogun directly. Adams was given an estate in Hemi, 2 swords which signified his status, and the authority over nearly 100 households. He was no longer a foreign prisoner, he was a lord of the realm. He wore the traditional robes, spoke the language fluently, and married a Japanese woman named Oyuki, with whom he had 2 children. For the next 2 decades, Adams became the shogun's key advisor on foreign affairs. When the Dutch and later the English finally sent their own trade missions to Japan, they were shocked to find a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Englishman sitting at the right hand of the shogun, acting as the ultimate gatekeeper. However, Adams lived a life of profound internal conflict. He was a man of 2 worlds who belonged to neither. To the English merchants who arrived later, he was too Japanese. They mistrusted him because he adopted the local customs and seemed more loyal to the shogun than to the British crown. To the Japanese, he was a respected lord, but he was always an outsider, a southern barbarian who had been elevated by the grace of the shogun. As the years passed, the political landscape of Japan shifted. Ieyasu died in 1616, and his successor, Hidetada, was far more suspicious of foreign influence. The era of the closed country, or sakoku, was beginning to dawn. Adams saw his influence wane as the shogunate began to restrict trade and persecute Christians. He was finally given permission to leave Japan, but by then he had spent half his life there. He chose to stay, continuing to work in the trade industry until his health began to fail. William Adams died on May 16, 1620, in Hirado at the age of 56. He left behind a will that split his estate between his family in England and his family in Japan, a final act of devotion to both lives he had lived. The legacy of William Adams is immense. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a bridge between 2 civilizations that had no common ground. He introduced Western shipbuilding techniques that would influence Japanese naval design for centuries. He played a pivotal role in the diplomatic dance that allowed Japan to choose its own path in a world being rapidly colonized by European powers. Today, he is still remembered in Japan with a yearly festival in his honor. He remains a symbol of the stranger in a strange land who didn't just survive, but excelled by embracing the culture that had initially captured him. He remains the only Englishman to ever be buried with the honors of a samurai. Subscribe for more.